Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm glad there's lots of energy. No one wants to quit talking after the 3 hours break of lunch and posters. Hope you got to meet some cool new people and reconnect with some old friends. So I'm Dr. Lauren Fink. I'm an assistant professor here, and it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Trinh Nguyen. Dr. Nguyen holds a PhD in developmental psychology from the University of Vienna, where she worked with Stephanie Hull. Since then, she's completed an impressive number of short and longer-term postdoctoral research stays at institutions like the University of Cambridge, the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences, and even McMaster on that list. So Dr. Nguyen is currently a part-time postdoctoral researcher at the Italian Institute of Technology with Giacomo Novembra, and also a part-time research associate at the Psychological Institute at Heidelberg University in Germany with Professor Sabine Pauwen. So Heidelberg is a bit of a homecoming for Dr. Nguyen because it's where she completed both her bachelor's and master's in psychology. So now, full circle, Trinh is back there starting her own small research group, and I'm very much looking forward to following what she does there with that research group. So Dr. Nguyen's work focuses on social cognition, really from multiple levels, so behavioral, physiological, and neural, things like imitation and dyadic dance to cardiac synchrony, motion capture, EEG, and FNIRS. I think we're all in for a very exciting and multimodal talk today, which you see that word multimodal in her title. So instead of focusing too much on the research, which you'll hear about from Trinh, I want to end with a personal story. So like I said, Trinh was here at McMaster last summer, and I had the pleasure of getting to know her a bit while she was here. And I don't know if any of you know, show of hands if you've gotten to walk Coots Paradise here at McMaster. Okay, nice. That's a fair number. If you haven't, we're not very far from the trailhead, and it's such a great feature of this campus that we have this nature walk that goes along the lake. And so what I remember most from this nice walk I had with Trinh was a talk about backpacks. So Trinh was on the market for a new backpack, and we were talking a lot about backpack features and discussing what would be most important for Dr. Nguyen's future backpack, like the pros and cons of different backpack shapes and materials. And I can tell you that I just had the pleasure of meeting Trin's new backpack. There it is, it's right here. It's awesome. It's from Japan. It's got a front zipper pocket, a back zipper pocket. It's got a luggage pass-through. It's got this nice handle at the top so you can grab it with one hand, easy access to that main central component. So after this talk, I'm sure that so many of you are going to want to approach Dr. Nguyen about the research, but if you're like, maybe an undergrad, don't know how to break the ice, you can compliment the new backpack. And so please join me in welcoming Dr. Trinh Nguyen to the stage.
Thank you very much for this really nice introduction. Yeah, meet my backpack over there, Japanese brand. So yeah, thank you very much for inviting. I'm a bit smaller than Lauren, so thank you very much for inviting me here today. I'm very honored to present a bunch of different research from my time in Rome, my time in Vienna, and now my time in Heidelberg. And it's going to be very multimodal, so strap in and let's get ready for this ride. So when I started my research journey a few years ago now, one question that really interested me is how can we understand child development, and how can we make sure that it's healthy, that it's functioning? What are the main ingredients? And what I realized very quickly is that it's all in these very early social interactions. So contrasting to what Sahar has told us this morning, we're gonna take a step forward, we're going to start from birth and then continue from there on. So I'm not going to talk about the prenatal period anymore. Now it's all going to be postnatal. And what these early social interactions do is that they have been shown to shape social, cognitive, and emotional development across all these different domains. They serve as a framework for acquiring communicative skills, for infants to learn about self-regulation because they are not able to do so in the beginning. And they also lay the foundations for social bonding between infants and their caregivers. So what are we looking at? When we look at the infant, they are able to share a lot of different social cues from the beginning on. Its movements, its vocalization, such as crying, eye contact, sharing of affect, and these abilities continue to develop over the first year of life. And what's really interesting is that it's not met by a wall of nothingness. It's of course met by somebody who's very responsive to that and who's trying to cue or induce these kinds of responses from the infant. And that caregiver tries to facilitate this early communicative signals through a bunch of different more overt behaviors that I'm going to focus on today. So one's, for example, affectionate touch, mutual gaze and shared attention. We also have infant-directed speech. And what I'm going to focus on today is infant-directed song and dance. So song and dance are an especially useful tool for us to try and understand child development because it helps us amplify and highlight these natural rhythms and exchanges that are happening anyways through this like mother-infant dance that we're able to observe. So what we're going to do is try and take this holistic perspective. I brought 4 studies with me today, and we're going to first have a look at how infant-directed song and dance play out, so from the caregiver side. Then we're going to switch perspectives to the infant, and we're going to look at how the infant responds to infant-directed song and dance, or music in general. And then we're going to try and have a look at musical interactions per se. So what happens when we bring both perspectives together? And at the end, I'm going to try and put some thoughts into your heads in terms of future perspectives of where we're going to go. And I'd be happy to discuss any of these later on. Okay, so let's start out with infant-directed song and dance. You heard a few examples already in Saha's talk, but I just want to quickly define infant-directed song again, which is a musical phenomenon that refers to kind of the modified, exaggerated form of singing that caregivers do when an infant is there with them. And if you've ever heard a parent sing to an infant, I think you know what I'm talking about. But I have a few examples with me here today. So you're gonna hear, I think, a Hungarian play song, a German play song, and an Italian song. So it's a European representation of what I brought with me. So what caregivers or adults often do in terms of how they use infant-directed song is that they use those to co-regulate and bond with the baby. There are acoustic cues, such as the slower, exaggerated rhythm, higher and more variable pitch than non-infant-directed music, meaning when the infant is absent. And infant-directed song also has a lot of non-acoustic cues. So it's a very socially rich, informative stimulus that caregivers or adults are providing to the infant. And this indicates or implicates gaze, facial expression, certain communicative gestures, and physical movement. So infant-directed song can be further categorized into 2 different types of songs that have 2 different types of functions. There are play songs, which I just referred to, which are supposed to be upregulating for the infant, so they're used in this playful context. And then on the other hand, we have the lullabies, that you probably know as well, which are supposed to be soothing, calming, and in some contexts also put the infants to sleep. These 2 types of songs have very unique acoustic features to them. So we and others have consistently shown that they differ in tempo. For example, here on the left, I don't know. Oh yeah, you can see my mouse here. The red condition is the play song condition, and the blue condition is the lullaby condition. And you can see that the play song condition has a much higher tempi than the lullaby condition. Then we have pulse clarity, and even though this is non-significant here, but there is still a trend that the play song has higher pulse clarity than the lullaby. It is higher in pitch than the lullaby, and it is sung louder than the lullaby. And this is very consistent either if you give them certain songs to sing or if you ask the mom to sing a certain song in a certain style, then you still find these acoustic differences. This is all in good, but a lot of this research has been conducted in the lab, and the question that we were really interested in is how does this look at home? Can we find these 2 different types of songs even in the family's homes? So what we did, and this study is led by Susanne Reisner in Vienna, is that we went to Austrian families' homes and did home recordings. So we went on a weekend or a weekday gave them some recording devices which looked like this, which were integrated into this like wearable shirts that both the baby, the mom, and the dad were able to wear. And we collected some data of like their general interaction. So what would they do during this whole 8-hour-long day, so to say? And then we analyzed this data to see how does infant-directed song play out at families' homes, Austrian families' homes. So what we found in our preliminary results is, first, we were really interested in asking the question, who is actually singing to the infant? So is it really like the mom? Is it maybe also the dad? Is it both parents? And what we see consistently is that in the majority of the cases, it's actually just the mom singing to the baby, so 60%. And then in 30% of the cases, it's also or only the dad singing to the baby. And then in 7% of the cases, it's when both parents sing to the baby. So it seems to be some sorts of like division of labor or division of song in the family's home when we actually don't invite them to the lab and give out these roles. Then next, we wanted to ask the question, what kind of songs were they singing to the infants? And what we see is that they do sing play songs and lullabies, but a lot of different ones. So we try to classify these songs into like, were they known songs, were they popular songs, or are they just like made up songs in general? And we actually found 160 different types of songs from these 14 families alone. So they were just singing like different tunes or like also like popular songs as well. But yeah, it was like a big bag of like mixed types of songs that they were singing. And yeah, a lot of spontaneous made-up songs as well, like just from the situation, like just from the toy. They were making up these songs as they went along, and it was less about these very traditional children's songs that we actually know of. So much about infant-directed song. Next, I want to quickly talk about infant-directed dance, which is another way of parents musically interacting with their child. And I brought this video with me today, and I hope it works, because this is actually, let's see. The video that my colleague sent me when we came up with the idea for this study. So as you can see, the caregiver here provides a rich rhythmic experience for their baby by rocking and bouncing them. Here, she's not really singing, but if we think about like these interactions of caregivers and infants at home, oftentimes the caregiver is both bouncing and rocking the baby, but also singing to them as well. And this has been something that has been rather neglected in like early music cognition research, or even just like child psychology research as well. So we really wanted to have a closer look at this phenomenon. So once we kind of move out of the music domain, we can find a bit of research on that. So for example, with this set of infants here, we found that a group of researchers in Italy found that walking was more effective than holding an infant when the infant was crying. And there is some research on swinging and rocking helping to calm down a crying baby. But as mentioned, most of this evidence is very anecdotal, like there are very few infants in these studies, and what these studies are also not considering is how caregivers might use infant-directed dance to upregulate babies as well, and not just downregulate a crying baby. So inspired from this observations in the wild, and unfortunately also the lack of research that has been done, we went out to do the study together with Laurel as well, led by Félix Bigon, and asked the question, so do mothers, while holding their infants, also move differently when they listen to a play song and a lullaby? And this is an example of our intern, Francesca, who's now doing a PhD in Dijon, when we started to pilot that study in our adult lab. As you can see, it's not very child-friendly, so we try to make sure it's safe for the 2 to 12-month-old infants that we're inviting to come in. So what we asked the moms to do is bring a baby carrier and then move to 4 different types of conditions. So this is one of the most famous Italian play songs that you can imagine. It's a counting song, actually, but every Italian knows it. And some of the moms are really annoyed by this song, but at least we knew it was like popular enough. So we asked them to just listen to the song and interact with their infant as they would, like as freely as they would. Then we also let them move to a lullaby condition, which sounds as such. Like another Italian lullaby that we chose that would be like kind of perfectly mimicking this, like the sound and the function that we're really interested in. And because, as I've shown you before, like the main acoustic feature that is different between play songs and a lullaby is the tempo, we wanted to control for that. Like we wanted to know that just not because a song is faster or slower that the parents or that the mom would move in a certain way. So what we created on top of that is a tempo-controlled stimulus, which is just a rattle in the same tempo as the music condition, which sounds as such. We then attached 23 sensors to the mom's body and used motion capture to extract the kinematics of the mom's movements during these 4 conditions. We then further used PCA to extract the different movement patterns, to simplify how the mom was moving in the space, and try to find differences between the 4 different conditions using a cluster-based permutation analysis. So what we found is that they showed 2 specific movement patterns that were different across conditions. One is the side sway, which I actually already saw in the you guys moving. And then the other one is vertical bounce. What's really interesting is that the side sway movements seem to be very lullaby specific. So what you can see down here is the amount of activation the moms would show in this specific type of movement. And what we can see here is that in the lullaby condition, the side sway was most activated in comparison to the 3 other conditions. And then the vertical bounce was most activated in the play song condition, as you can see here on the right. And there is a difference in the absolute value of explained variance, meaning activation, because these movement patterns explain different amounts of variance in the data in general. And just for you to know, the side sway, for example, is one of the most pronounced movement patterns that moms do. So it is the principal movement number 1 and explains around 40 to 45% of the variance in the kinematics. And then the vertical bounce movement is actually the 11th and the 12th component, meaning it explains very low amounts of movements, but still seems to explain some difference between the conditions. This is all interesting and such, but then we were wondering, do they just move in this way because they're listening to these songs, not necessarily because there is an infant in this whole context? Is the music per se just so inducive of either swaying or bouncing? So what we did on top of that is that we invited 20 age-matched women without children and gave them a baby carrier and substituted the baby by using a 7-kilogram sack of rice. Yeah, you can imagine the scenario here, I think, trying to participate in such a study. A side note, at the end of this whole experiment, we actually let them dance freely just to decompress of this whole weird situation. But what we did is that we used the PCA components of the first study and put it on these 220 age-matched women without children as well, and extracted how these women would change their side sway and their vertical bounce movements according to the 4 conditions. And what we find here is no significant differences whatsoever across the 4 conditions, meaning that by just carrying a baby, they would move differently in a play song and lullaby context, but just by switching the baby out, that would decrease, and the people would not show the same activations in the principal movement patterns anymore. So it seems to be this very infant-directed or infant-specific type of movement that the women were showing. Okay. So to quickly sum up this first part, we find that there is infant-directed song and dance that have unique acoustic and kinematic features and that emerge during infant caregiving specifically, that can be mapped to the regulatory functions, so either upregulating or downregulating, and it can be consistently observed in the lab, and at least for infant song, also in the wild. Next, we're going to move on to the infant responses, so what's going on the other side of the receiver of that infant-directed song and dance. Okay. So how we're going to look at this on this side, I think Sahar has actually brought really the prerequisites of like what's going on in the infant brain already. But we're going to go at this from a similar but also different perspective again, which is that infants come into this world like with very like extended abilities to attend and engage with music. But then what we understand less about this whole thing, like even though we see so much evidence already at birth or even before birth, like in terms of gestational age, is that we understand very little about the developmental trajectory or the developmental trend that's happening later on. So how does this whole thing develop into this adult response that we're observing across the field? So how we're going to look at this is from a two-component point of view. One is the auditory component, which is how do infants process ID song in this case. And as I mentioned, there is a bit of neural evidence from newborn studies as well as like other infant studies by Erica and Laura and Laurel. And then we're going to look at it from a second component as well, so the other modality, which is the motor component. Because we know from other research that infants also spontaneously respond and move to music, as evidenced by a large number of GIFs and memes on the internet. And what we also know is that both are probably feedbacking into each other, and it's not just a one-way road of attending to something and then responding to something. And what we did as well is that we looked at it from two different perspectives. So one is that we wanted to manipulate the regularity of the infant-directed song, because this is such an important component as to why maybe it is used in early infant caregiving. We wanted to see what if we destroy the structure of the music, or not necessarily destroy, like we can't really destroy it, right? But make it worse and less predictive, like what happens to the infant perception then. And then two, we wanted to look at pitch, which is a very important component for infants. Like we know from infant-directed speech, for example, that infants have this high pitch preference. But what about music? Like we weren't really sure about which way to go, because from adult research, we know that low pitch is very inducive of movements, for example. But is it the same in infants? Like can we also make infants dance by playing like bass and like groovy, low frequency types of music? The study is actually out right now in eLife, so it's not revised yet, but we're currently revising it. But you can already read it up if you're interested. So what we did is that we invited 3 different age groups of infants and their families to the lab, as well as an adult control sample. So we have a 3-month-old, 6-month-old, and 12-month-old sample that is. Like we tested 30 infants, but as the infant researchers know, it's not 30 infants at the end. It's 25, 26, and 27 infants. And we measured their neural responses using EEG, a 32-channel EEG measurement, and we extracted their movements using deep lab cut. Another, I think, rather painful way of extracting their movements, but it does the job, right? I think the deep lab cut people know what I'm talking about. So how this looks like is as such. Yeah, very cute from the infant perspective. I don't know if the adult researchers were a bit shocked about the amount of movement, but this is how it goes with infant research. This is actually a really cute 12-month-old who wasn't too bored by our stimuli. So what we did is that we let them listen to 4 different types of conditions. First, we let them listen to a music condition, and then a shuffled music condition, which was our regularity manipulation that I just talked about. So we randomized the IOIs and the melody so that it will result in a somewhat more unpredictable type of music or non-music. Like it's not very amusical because we didn't want to scare the infant, right? Like we still want to have them go through the whole procedure, which sounds as such. Yeah, a bit like experimental jazz, maybe, for some ears. And then we let them go, listen to the 2 other pitch conditions. One is the high pitch condition. Ooh. So still quite pleasing, I would say, but already a bit high. It's all within the infant-directed speech, infant-directed song frequency range, though. And last but not least, we let them listen to this low pitch condition in which we transposed the bass an octave lower. I see some groovy dancers over there. Thank you very much. Yeah. So let's have a look at the results. We're going to first have a look at the neural responses, and then we're going to have a look at the movement responses. So in terms of the neural responses, the results look as such. These are grand averages across the whole age group. So 3, 6, 12 months in adult from top to bottom. Then we have the music condition in orange and the shuffled music condition in green or khaki. And as you can see, there are robust neural responses of the infants to the musical tones that we epoch the data to, in comparison to the shuffled music condition. The response seems to mature over time, so you can see a slight increase in amplitude. And what happens as well is that it seems to decrease in latency over the first year of life, so it becomes a bit faster. And at around 12 months of age, we can see a second response emerging, which we think is probably this like P1, P2 response that the adults show. It just takes a while for the slower infant brain to catch up with the rather fast stimuli that we're showing to them. Then next, we wanted to have a look at how the pitch manipulations played out in the infant brain responses. And what we see is this very specific high-pitch sensitivity in the infant brain at around 6 months of age. This effect seems to subside over time, which could be due to different reasons, but if we can trust these results, it would actually be really interesting because from a social development point of view, 6 months is a very special age for the infants. It's the peak of their dyadic interactions with their caregivers. It's when they're most engaged, without any toys, without any distractions whatsoever. And right after that, that's when they start to explore their world much more. They become much more mobile, they're moving around, they want toys, and all these kinds of things. Their attention just widens a lot more. So maybe this high-pitch preference, which maybe coincides with infant-directed speech and song, is just not as maybe important anymore. It's probably still very important, but the processing of low pitch might catch up with their high pitch sensitivity that they have at 6 months of age. So next, we're going to have a look at the movement responses. So are they maybe the same? Do they emerge as early? We had that question before in the previous Q&A. So what we did here is that we extracted the infant's movement responses, very similar to the first infant-directed dance study that I showed you using PCA, so principal component analysis. And what we found is 10 different types of principal movement patterns that the infant were showing. So all of these are additive to one another. They're all happening at the same time. We're just categorizing them into these different patterns to see if some are more affected by the music or not. And what we can see here is some movements that are very much in the upper body of the infant. Then we have some movements that are more towards the lower body of the infant. like leg kicking, some feet shuffling and feet pedaling. And then last but not least, we have whole body wiggling is what I call it, something that concerns the whole body of the infant. And what we can then do to first see, okay, are these movement patterns in any way affected by the music? We can use Granger causality to model this kind of music-motor coupling. And what we did is actually inspired by Luke's study over here. We used the amplitude envelopes of the music to predict the movement of the infant. This is the green arrow that you can see here. We also did it the other way around, just as a proof of concept, to see if, like, by any weird chance, does the movement also predict the music? And luckily, it does not, because it's pre-recorded music. The music really seems to predict the movement that we're seeing in the infants. More specifically is that we see this music movement coupling or prediction across 3 different ages. So it really seems to start at 3 months of age already. It becomes a bit more robust by 6 months of age, and then maybe a bit more specific by 12 months of age, with around 200 millisecond lag. And then in terms of pitch, we actually see that high-pitched music is much more predictive of infant music across all the 3 different ages. So the pros and cons, like to Granger prediction or Granger causality, is that it's a very good measure of like something that is maybe a bit more abstract and we don't really know which direction it goes. But the problem of Granger causality is also, what does it really mean? So we tried to dig a bit deeper into the data by first running some epoch analysis, meaning that we picked peak instances of peak in the amplitude envelope, cut the movement data according to those peaks, and try to see, is there maybe some phase-locked response that we can see in the movement? But unfortunately, there was nothing really robust that we could find, except for maybe in the 12 months old. You can see there down here that there is a bit of a peak, like around, like after 200 milliseconds, but it's definitely not significant in comparison to the shuffled music condition. So we thought, okay, maybe that's too strict. Like, of course, they cannot do like very phase-locked, like synchronized responses to the music. Maybe it's something a bit more general, like periodicity. Like, do they maybe just move in the tempo of the music? And that's what we tried as well, similar to Zentner and Erola's approach with autocorrelations. We actually find nothing again, so no significant differences across conditions in terms of periodicity of the movement. So what we derive from this is that the movement responses in the infants seem to develop all a bit slower. They seem to be a bit more sporadic maybe and inconsistent in their size and direction, and therefore, like in this regard, result in non-coordinated types of movements instead. Last but not least, we tried to look at the data from a more general point of view. So maybe it's not about like coordination of movement or like specific responses of the movement, but maybe the infant just moved more in the music condition than like in comparison to the shuffled music condition or in the high pitch condition and the low pitch condition. So what we did is run an analysis on the quantity of movement of those PMs. And what you can see here is that it's only the 12-month-olds that moved more to the music condition than the shuffled music condition. And there were no significant differences whatsoever in the other age groups or in the pitch conditions, which you can see on the right in blue and violet. We can still have a closer look or more specific look at the different like movement patterns, like do they maybe differ differently across the conditions? And what we can see is that a lot of like upper body movements are implicated by this like increasing quantity of movement from shuffled music to music. So it's more about like the side sway, some type of clapping maybe, some arm pedaling, and we don't see any differentiation whatsoever in the lower body movements of the infant, which is interesting. But I think one thing that we can consider here, and we're going to come back to this in the later study as well, is that the infants were seated in this high chair where they placed their feet on the lower bounds of the chair. So they were really free to move their lower body, but their upper body and their arms were really free to move around instead. So that could already affect how the infants moved in this type of context. And it would be really interesting to maybe go to either like a free lab where they could move around as they want, or to the families' homes and see how they actually moved in the wild. So to summarize this part, we can see that infants as young as 3 months of age already preferentially attend to music in comparison to shuffled music. This neural response matures over the first year of life. And in comparison to that, movement responses seem to develop a bit slower, like in a more protracted manner. There is some basic auditory motor coupling or prediction present early on, but this robust movement coordination or synchronization to music that we see in adults seems to develop beyond the first year of life. And we find this very interesting developmental window of high-pitch sensitivity at around 6 months of age. So next, we're going to move on to actual musical interactions. Because when we look at the evidence in early development, we actually see that the majority of musical activities that infants participate in are not necessarily listening to pre-recorded songs, but it's actually caregivers singing to them that is most common in those musical activities, especially so during the first year of life. So the question that we wanted to ask with this last set of studies that I'm going to present is, how do infants process and respond to live sung ID music or ID songs by their parents? So the first study in this domain that I brought with me today, we ran this one in Vienna, where we invited 37-month-old infants and their caregivers to the lab. We again measured EEG to to get their neural tracking abilities. And then this time, because we didn't have the skills back then, we actually manually coded their rhythmic movements instead by the scale by Thelen. It is defined as 3 repetitive movements of a body part, or even the whole body, within 1 second. So a poor student had to go through all these videos frame by frame and find these instances and count them. And what we then let the families do is go through this kind of 3 conditions. And we had the rest conditions in the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. And then we had 2 different types of conditions in the middle, where we now let the mom sing either a play song or a lullaby. These sound as such. Now you get a German example of a play song. Oh, no, or not. Let's see.
Es tanzt ein Biber-Butzemann in unserem Haus herum, Fiedebum. Es tanzt ein Biber-Butzemann in unserem Haus herum. Er rötet sich, er schüttelt sich, er wirft sein Säcklein hinter sich. Es tanzt ein Biber-Butzemann in unserem Haus herum.
Let's see, okay. And this is the lullaby.
Schlaf, Kindlein, schlaf. Am Himmel ziehen die Schaf. Die Sternlein sind die Lämmerlein. Der Mond, der ist das Schäferlein. Schlaf, Kindlein, schlaf.
Okay. And now that we don't have the well-controlled, pre-produced stimuli anymore with individual tones, we have something that made us struggle a bit more, but made us turn to using temporal response functions, which were also previously mentioned. So what we did is that we used the amplitude envelope of the mom singing to then predict the EEG response of the baby's brain. And the temporal response function is actually this set of, it's a rich regression, which then uses convolution with this set of weights over here, which we can then model in terms of, how does this response maybe look like over time. So we can use the temporal, the time series information in its whole to predict the EEG. And this is then our measure of neural tracking. So what we find in this first study in terms of neural responses or neural tracking is that first we can compare, okay, do they even track like the musical stimuli in general? Is there any attention or listening at all? And we can say yes, because what we did is that we compared it to shuffled stimuli that we generated as a control condition. And the comparison of both songs, so both the lullaby and the play song, were better tracked than their shuffled comparison. And the next comparison that we can do is the lullaby and the play song. And what we found here is that actually the lullaby was tracked better than the play song. And why is that so? I mean, I think there can be many different reasons. There can be some very low-level reasons. The lullaby, for example, is very slow, right? Like we've seen it before, like we heard it before. And what this could then induce, how this could then be influencing the brain's responses is that these long IOIs can help the brain like really fully develop these neural responses that then are reflected in the neural tracking that we see here. So it just means that we have bigger ERPs because there is a slower song, and therefore the infants are tracking the songs better. It can be due to other reasons as well, though, like the lullabies, for example, are less variable, they're much more predictive, they're much more regular, so maybe it's that as well, that they are tracked better just because they're more regular, they're more easy to process. Next, we wanted to have a look at the movement and this type of data. And what we actually found, surprisingly, is that there was no difference, like no significant difference between, in the rhythmic movements between the two different songs whatsoever in this study. And this was very surprising to us because, I think from the literature, we would actually expect some different types of movements, right? Like the literal function of the play song is to arouse and be playful. And why should they move the same amount in the lullaby condition? So what we noticed is that our whole setup might have been a bit too restrictive to the infant. If you can remember, like we set them in this like car seat, they were really strapped in because we wanted as little movement as possible. We wanted to have clean EEG. So the question that we then asked is, okay, what if we free them of this like restricted car seat? What if we put them in a seat that is much more like free to, where they can freely move around? So this is what we did. So we ran a second study inviting 40 7-month-old infants and their caregivers, and we put them in this seat over here and let the moms do the same conditions again, sing to the infants.
Efter tecken hinter sig, es tanzt ein Biberbutter, man in unserem Haus herum. Es tanzt ein Biber.
And as you can see, the infant is already much more responsive. There's some feet waggling going on. I mean, there's also no EEG cap, which is also very bothersome to an infant, right? Like the wet electrodes and everything. So all of this seemed to work a bit better for a question that we wanted to ask. And I think this also, like, if you think about it, also like affects the previous study that I talked about. So what we did here again is manually code the rhythmic movements of the infants with the same definition, meaning 3 repetitive movements within 1 second of a limb or the whole body. And what we then finally saw is that yes, there is a significant difference if you let them move, right? So what we find is significantly more rhythmic movement in the play song condition than in the lullaby condition. So it seems to be that in this overall like social interactive, like musical context, it's very important as to which features you manipulate, how much you control, and how much naturalism you let them be. Like, yeah, free interactions are of course great for some measures, but then it's like bad for other measures. So it's really a balancing act of like what kind of modality do you wish to like come through in this type of context. So this is great and all. We have neural responses, we have rhythmic movements, depending on the type of song function that we're seeing. But what does it all mean? Like, does it help infant development in some way or another? So this question we wanted to follow up with this question at 20 months of age, where we sent the parents a language development questionnaire, which is the Austrian CDI. And we just asked them to report on the infant's active vocabulary. So how many words were the infants able to say at 20 months of age? And then we tried to relate that to the rhythmic movements of the infants that they showed at 7 months, as well as their neural tracking at 7 months of age. And what we find in both cases is that the neural tracking of the play song, as well as the amount of rhythmic movements in the play songs, were both predictive of infant language development at 20 months of age. So, like better tracking and like more rhythmic movement. There was nothing significant in the lullaby condition, even though the trends seem to be like quite big, but the confidence intervals are also quite big, because the data is a bit messy. I mean, it's still infant data, right? But this was really interesting to us because, yes, of course, we know about the like very close links of music and language language development. Like we've seen the studies on musical training and like early musical classes. But we were wondering, like, why is it like active vocabulary size? Like, what is it about music that then makes the infant speak more words at a later time point? So we then actually turned to a different type of response that we neglected this far. And that is infant vocal responses to Live ID song, right? Like infants are not just showing neural responses and movement responses, but if you like participate in these kinds of studies, or if you have an infant yourself or observing somebody else, there are also maybe like, I mean, some people might say they try to sing along. I don't know if it's like actual singing, but they're actually vocalizing quite a bit as well. And we wanted to have a closer look at those vocalizations. Like, do they mean anything? Like, do they maybe like mediate this, this link between neural tracking, rhythmic movement, and language development? So the one that we were focusing on is canonical babbling. Canonical babbling is the repetition of like syllables consisting of like these consonants vowel combinations, such as ba ba ba, da da da. I think you've heard of, like you've probably heard these already. And they are a precursor to actual infant language production. So before they form the first words, canonical babbling is what they do. So we wanted to see, okay, how do infants respond in this context, just in terms of vocalizations, but also how do they respond in terms of canonical babbling? We focused on the play song condition because we saw the links between rhythmic movement and neural tracking to language development, specifically in the play song condition. And also just intuitively, we thought it wouldn't make too much sense to look in the lullaby condition when they're maybe supposed to sleep, right? Okay, so what we did here is that we took 22, like for now, took 22 of the infants from the previous study, and we tested another 27-month-old infants for this control condition that we wanted to do. So we used the lyrics of the play song and just told the mom to speak to the infant using these lyrics. So we really wanted to control for like just the rhythmicity of the lyrics, that what they would induce. And then we manually coded infant vocalizations, both in terms of just how much they vocalized, but also if they showed any canonical babbling. So what we found is that infants in general were vocalizing quite a bit across both conditions, so that's really exciting. So it seems to us that vocalizations are another way, another modality in which infants respond to infant-directed song. But as I mentioned, there were no significant differences across both conditions. But then, when we look at canonical babbling, we can actually see a significant difference between the song and the speech condition. So infants seem to be more likely to canonically babble in the infant-directed song condition in comparison to the speech condition. Even though it is very little, we use zero-inflated regression models here to kind of model like the infants who were not like babbling at all from the infants who were babbling a bit. And there was like a super performer, this one over here, who was babbling, I think, like in 7 instances. Like he or she was very, very active. I just had to listen with my student, like just to try and see if the babbling ratio was different in some kind of way. But yeah, we are at this edge of like canonical babbling where they're just starting to, so it's not all the infants showing this type of responses. But it seems to be indicative of this like enhanced vocal ability that they showed, particularly during infant-directed song. Okay, and then finally, to the last part of the study. As you can see, we're very like frugal with the studies that we run. It's very hard to get infant data, so you really try to like get everything out of it. So what we did for this last part is that, yes, like we looked a lot into infant responses to caregivers like singing or recorded singing. But what about the other way around, right? Like the caregivers not just sitting there waiting for these infant responses and again doing nothing, but they're also replying to them in a contingent manner. So this is something that we did, again, together with Susanne during her PhD study. We took both of the first studies together and combined this data set and then looked at infant gaze and the infant-directed song based, like inspired from the study by Miriam Lenz as well, like where the infants were particularly focusing on like the beat instances in terms of like mom's gaze and stuff like that. We were interested in, okay, how, like does the mom in our case, for example, change the way she sings when the baby is looking at her? Like is that maybe a salient signal that she's picking up upon and changing her behavior accordingly? So what we did is that we extracted spectral flux from the mom's recording. And then we did a type of event-related analysis where we took the infant's gaze, like this, and cut 10 seconds around it. So it was kind of like 5 seconds before infant gaze and 5 seconds after. And then we compared that to other instances where there was no infant gaze whatsoever to see if those changes were actually significant upon the infant gaze or if it was just random all over. So what we found, first of all, is that in terms of acoustic differences between the play song and the lullaby condition, of course the play song condition had higher spectral flux. It was much more variable in general anyways. So that is kind of a good like proof of concept from our earlier studies. And then we also already found, like on a condition-based level, that the infants were looking more towards the mother in the play song condition than in the lullaby condition. And then as a final step, we actually see big differences in terms of the two conditions upon the gaze behavior. So we have the play song condition on the left and the lullaby condition on the right. The gaze instance is marked here in the middle as 0. And all these red points are significant permutation-based analysis of changes that are higher in the normal gaze condition in comparison to the surrogate gaze condition, meaning the instances where there was no gaze of the infant whatsoever. And what we can see is that the mom seems to adapt her singing within 3 seconds after infant gaze in the play song, while in the lullaby condition, there were no significant differences of either before or after infant gaze whatsoever. So she didn't really seem to change her singing at all. It was more like keeping it constant, maybe also more likely like fitting to the song function, that is to be like regular, like soothing, calming, and not too much, too arousing and too playful. So what we find here is that infants and caregiver, like both infants and caregiver, actually seem to respond to each other in these instances. And it's not only the infant responding, but also the caregiver, like contingentally adapting their behavior towards the infant. So what we can see from this set of studies is that infant-directed singing evokes infant responses in multiple modalities, as we can see, brain, movement, vocalizations, gaze, and it has some links to enhanced language development. And what we see as well, especially in the last study, is that mother singing and infant responses are reciprocal towards each other. So now I want to come to the last part of my talk on the future perspective. So where are we going from here? You saw a lot about like the kind of very holistic responses or adaptations that we can see from both sides. But what we haven't really considered in these sets of studies is that it's not only multimodal, but it's also multi-person, right? Like there are lots more dyadic, dynamic processes that are ongoing that we're not really mapping out yet. And this is something that we're currently doing, which is to ask questions that are much more closely related to ID music or ID song and its function for social communication. So for example, in this study here, we invited moms to play music to their infant using an electronic music box. And here we actually measure the neural responses and the movement responses of both mom and baby. We can use EEG in this case because the mom is not singing the music. You can probably imagine like EEG and singing, not the best. But we try and circumvent it and model it by using this music box, and it would sound as such. Or not, but the song is actually the same song that we used before in the dancer study. There. It's fine, like I'm not gonna sing and like bother you guys with this, but you can imagine it's a Hungarian play song. And as mentioned, what we did is measure the neural responses using EEG hyperscanning. And we're currently extracting the spontaneous behavior using both like manual coding of like gaze and affect, but also using automatic extraction, such as using MediaPipe this time to save myself some nightmares of like constantly labeling videos. And it seems to work quite well. So if you're like into automatic like movement extractions, like feel free to talk to me. I can resonate with your struggles. Okay. So next, what I'm also really interested in is the implications of musical interactions, right? Like it's multimodal, it's multi-person, but what does it actually mean for child development? Like this is the question that I came in, I wanted to answer, and of course it's like there is no perfect study and it's really hard to answer because it's such a big question. But I wanted to understand this more from a musical point of view. So the kind of studies that we can do to answer this question, one of it we actually did this summer and just finished data collection. Sarah's over there. And together with Laurel as well in the live lab in the dance studio, we asked moms to come in with their babies and let them dance and sing to try and co-regulate their baby or regulate their baby using both play songs and lullabies that were free to choose. And this would look like this. Yeah, I think the sound just gave up. Like this is actually a great mom, like who sings very nicely. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Okay. Yeah, but if you want to listen to the song, it's amazing. Just wanted to spoil that. Not every session is as enjoyable, but this one was great. Yeah, but what we did in this case is that we instructed them to either dance to a recording of their song, dance and sing at the same time, or dance to a recording of another mom's song to then manipulate contingency of how they adapted to their child's signal. And we did physiological recordings like of dual ECG, so both mom and baby had some ECG on their body. We measured their kinematics using motion capture, so the 23 markers to extract the mom's movement patterns and see if we can replicate what we found in Rome. And then we also recorded video and audio with which we can model all of the time series information that we have from this very rich type of data. And I'm really looking forward to analyze this data more and maybe bring you some next year, like I hope so. Okay, and then finally, I'm just gonna mention one thing, like I'm not doing anything in that regard currently. But I've been thinking about this quite a lot, and I feel like we're looking at a lot of moms in our research, right? And it's something that I always wonder about, like what about the dads? Like what do they do? Do they do the same? Do they do something differently? I did a bit of like father-child interactions before, and I like sometimes, like they often do interact differently, but I really want to understand like how they interact differently, because we know that they're really important for child development. They affect the child develops in different ways than what the moms do. So I'm just going to put this idea out there. I'm going to be happy if somebody else does it too, but if you want to talk about it, like feel free to hit me up as well. Okay, so that's all for me today. I really want to thank you very much for your attention. And this is the wonderful team I work with in Italy. As you can see, we do lab retreats at the beach every year. So it's a great team to work with. Giacomo, Felix, especially. Then I have to thank the team in Vienna and the families in Vienna as well, because this is where we do the majority of our research. It's a great baby lab if you're interested in babies. Then, of course, like everybody at McMaster who helped me to feel really at home here in the summer, and then all the funders as well. Thank you very much.
Hello. Okay. Hi, Trinh. Great talk. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I actually have a lot of questions, but I'll just ask one that I'm really curious about. How do you reconcile your movement artifacts that you're getting with your EEG data when you're combining the two methods?
Yes, that's a very good question, right? Like it's kind of a horror story when you think about it from like an EEG point of view and when you want as clean data as possible. Yeah, so we went at this from like a few different perspectives. So one thing is that we used a bunch of processing steps to try and get rid of the movement artifacts. So we use ASR, we use ICA, like we use the whole shebang, and as strict as possible as well. So we might have gotten rid of some of the neural data as well in that regard. But yeah, we try to clean it up as much as possible. And then we try to compare data quality across the different age groups and such, so that we just wanted to make sure that we're not like deleting anything in particular, or yeah, that data quality is just comparable. And then the other thing is, I think, is that we just accepted the fact that it's a bit messy. We try and discuss it in our paper as well, and I'm happy to like talk about it afterwards. I think like the movement artifacts on the one hand can like increase maybe some of the neural responses if you think about it that way, and maybe like confound the effects that we find. But what they can do as well is that they mask the effects that we find. So it can go in both directions. Yeah. So just by like trying and compare everything within age group, we wanted to make sure that it's not affecting all of our analysis too much. But it is a concern. Yeah, we just try to clean up the data as much as possible. Yeah. Yes.
Thanks for your
Now I can hear you.
Thanks for your interesting talk. And I'm interested in whether do infants show smiling face, or do infants are crying during your musical interaction experiment. So I'm interested in the emotional aspect of infants.
Oh, that's a good question. I think we started to look at the data, but I don't remember the results exactly. Because, I think it would be, it's a really interesting question in terms of, do they maybe enjoy it? Is there some rewarding aspect to it? So for the social interaction study, we looked at it for a bit, but it wasn't really, telling us much. But I think it would be much more telling, actually, for the it's not the first, but the first infant response study that we showed with low pitch and high pitch. It's currently in progress. So unfortunately, I can't say anything, but yes, it would be super interesting to have a look at that.
Can I ask the difference between the Italian movement data and the Austrian movement data, at least the examples you played with the Italian songs, were not just voices, they had a rhythm track, and then in Austria it was just the mother singing. Was the Italian studies, was it just the mother sing, or you said they were pre-recorded, was it just voice, or did it also have instrumentation, including rhythm, that might have induced the babies to move more?
So the Italian study you're referring to was actually also conducted in Vienna, but it's fine. Yeah, but it's like it was pre-recorded music, and it actually had a flute, which would be mimicking the voice, and then a double bass to really facilitate the rhythm a bit more. So it was a polyphonic pre-recording that we made. Yeah, so it's not exactly the same as infant-directed song, but it's modeled on infant-directed song. Yeah.
So this comes from one of our online participants. It's a question about the last third of the presentation. They're wondering about asking if you were looking at / controlling for infant temperament. I could imagine that some infants are more or less likely to move / babble based on their temperament. And this could be more extreme in the unfamiliar lab setting.
Yes, we always measure infant temperament, but we never find anything. But I also think it's because we have too small sample sizes for temperament differences. Because like the temperament differences, like in general, like we often see them. It's a lot about like how like active the babies are, how well regulated the babies are, and stuff like that. But then at the end, like who comes into our lab is a very homogeneous sample with very few individual differences in temperament. So I think that's our issue as to why we don't find any effects of temperament in our cases.
Any all of you, I'll briefly use my chair. Or do we have any? Okay, go ahead, Dan. No, go ahead.
Can you hear me? That was so great. Thanks, Trinh. I was wondering, for the data you showed comparing spectral flux and gaze, or eye contact, you were framing it as the parents responding to the eye contact, but could it be a predictive mechanism, like something in the song that the baby knows is coming up, where there's more spectral flux, like on the beat things tend to be, and that's similar to what Miriam and Sahar showed earlier as well.
Yeah, for sure. Like I think I simplified that maybe a bit too much. It could be predictive as well. Like we try to do some like Ranger prediction analysis on this type of data too, but it was a bit more difficult, so that's why we went with the epoch and averaging, because it then resulted in a higher signal-to-noise ratio in general. But yeah, it would be really interesting to maybe show or like look at it in a future study, like if it is predictive or if it is like more succeeding, like in terms of like, yeah, what comes first.
Yeah, in these natural experiences, exchanges, they're not mutually exclusive either. They could both
exactly,
be
yeah. Like they could definitely feed back upon each other as well. Yeah, I think like, I mean, yeah, the study that we've done to the best of our knowledge at that time. So we're always finding something to nitpick about and be like, oh, I wish we did this thing differently, or we let them sing like for longer amounts of time so we can model it all better. Yeah, but for sure, like I think it would be super, super interesting, and I hope I get the chance like to make it better in the future.
Okay, I'll ask a question, and meanwhile, maybe someone could get a mic to Anna, because I saw that she had a question too. So I have two kind of questions. One is just a clarification. The study with the German moms, it looked like they were reading as they sang.
Yeah.
But then that's also the study that you did look at eye contact in later, right? So I was just wondering about that. That's like an easy methods question. Then this is a more off-the-wall question, but I thought it was so clever, your rice bag control. Like you're really controlling for the weight of that thing and how people move with something this big. But I guess what's not being controlled for there is the like social aspect, this, living other. And it is a very random idea, but it occurred to me the way some people are with their dogs, like little dogs. I was wondering if this could be like another control condition, women singing to their baby dogs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, like we thought about a bunch of different studies. I think this set of studies is actually one of the most productive ones of ours, because we keep coming up with new ideas. Like you could do it with a dog. You could do it like with a cat, like something small. You could do it with like a robot. you know, like a
Yeah.
small baby robot that is
Sure.
moving a bit, like with
Yeah.
a doll. Yeah, you name it, you get it, guys. We thought about this a lot. But then we went with a bag of rice because it was the easiest to do. But for sure, like,
Totally.
I think, like, yeah, if you want to do more, like, the sets of studies can be extended, like, indefinitely, I feel, in a way.
For sure.
And then the other question, yes, I think that's one thing about the study that I would, for example, change in the future. So we wanted to make sure that the mom singing was standardized in some sorts of way. So we had the lyrics like pinned on the back of, on the back of the baby on a wall. And they were able to use those lyrics to sing the song. And I think we then noticed, like in later studies, is that it's actually not necessary. Like they were just like a bit occupied by this whole thing. And what one could do instead is just let them repeat the same phrase over and over again, and you would still have some control, but you wouldn't have this like distracting feature of them in the back, and then try and see what gaze behaviors they do, right? Yeah, for sure. Like
Yeah.
that's a bit of a confound.
Cool. Okay. Well, I think for this session, we're going to have one more question. Then if anyone still has burning questions, we'll be in the Q&A. So you could keep preparing your questions. Let's go to Anna.
Uh-huh. So this one, you mean? Oh, sorry. That's. Yeah. Yeah, it could be due to many different reasons. But one of them for sure is probably like how parents use play songs and lullabies to modify attention, right? Like play songs are not only like playful as such, but parents also often use to like teach infants about maybe certain toys, certain words, like certain phrasings. Like it's overall this more like shared attention context. While lullabies, on the other hand, like other people have shown it, I think like it was in one of Center Tree Hub's like previous studies or papers, where she actually wrote that when parents sing a lullaby to an infant, that's when their attention turns inward instead and not outward, right? And all these kinds of things, like it's still a bit of a magic box. But yeah, this is what we're thinking about why it is the play song and not necessarily the lullaby. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this session. I'll ask you actually to just come over here. Oh yeah, let's give a round of applause.